I've been talking about the Mormon CES letter lately. For those of you who might not know about the CES letter, it's basically this big long letter that was written to the Mormon Church by this guy named Jeremy Runnels, and it asks direct questions to the Mormon Church. The questions dismantle their belief system, one question at a time. It starts out by talking about errors in the Book of Mormon, a purportedly perfect book, and it destroys fallacious and factually incorrect beliefs as it moves through their doctrine. So I figured I would address some of the most problematic questions I have for the Watchtower Society, the company that owns Jehovah's Witnesses religion. I addressed some other questions in a previous video, but this one stands on its own, so you don't have to watch them in any specific order. If you do want to watch the other one, it'll be in a card at the end of the video and in the description. Okay, let's get into it. One more thing before we get into it. I'm meeting up with fans on June 30th, 2019 at a park in Lincoln, Nebraska to hang out and grill for a few hours. If you guys want to come, then check the card in the corner or the link in the description. Also, if you like what I do and you want to make sure I can keep doing it, consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a card in the corner that'll get you to that too, so check it out. Okay, now let's get into the first question I have for Jehovah's Witnesses. Number 1. How can you justify Jehovah's Witnesses' use of cult-like language? Here's an example. In their book, Keep Yourself in God's Love, on page 34, paragraph 19, it's talking about when to shun people. The subheading is entitled, When to Withdraw Fellowship. It says, it may be a real challenge to avoid someone who had perhaps been a friend or who is related to us. Will we take a firm stand, thereby showing that we put loyalty to Jehovah and his righteous laws above all else? Remember that Jehovah places high value on loyalty and obedience. These examples are all over the place. Let me list a few examples of things cults all have in common. If you see examples of this, then there might be a problem. Instilling irrational fears or phobias of leaving the group, like the fear of Armageddon coming any day looming over you. If you don't follow the rules, then you'll die. Or labeling some emotions as worldly, shunning you if you disobey or disbelieve, encourage you to spy on and report on others' misconduct, forbid you from speaking to ex-members and critics, or discouraging access to information outside the group, like telling you that you should get information about the group on their website instead of from other sources. That's not just the case with Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the case with Scientology, Mormonism, the People's Temple aka Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, and lots of other cults. To varying degrees, of course, but it's there, and it's above and beyond any normal religion. There's a strong sense of unity among Scientology, Mormonism, and the other. They have church websites that define their beliefs, and if you differ from those, there's a varying amount of punishment for it, which is another thing these groups have in common, a system of rewards and punishments designed to modify people's behavior. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness, keep a lookout for that, because they do it exactly the same way as every other cult does it. This stuff is built up and gotten worse over time, but I think it started really getting bad between the 1960s and the 1990s, because that's when they started to get more and more extreme about closing ranks and discouraging people from talking to critics or ex-members. Okay, here's the second question. Number 2. How does the governing body deal with all the deaths on their consciences from the rule about not taking blood transfusions? First of all, is the blood rule justified by the Bible in the first place? That's really one of the most important questions here. What justification do Jehovah's Witnesses give for not taking blood transfusions, which is a super straightforward, safe, common, modern medical practice? It really all boils down to scriptural justification, right? Because if it isn't justified in the Bible, then everything else falls away. You can talk until you're blue in the face about how medically unsafe or unnecessary it is, even though that's not the case. But we'll get into that. The bottom line is, if God doesn't actually care about blood transfusions, then you should really leave the decision up to doctors and statistics. So what scriptural justification does the Jehovah's Witnesses governing body give for telling their members to let their children die if they need a blood transfusion? It all centers around one main verse, and from that, they branch outward to retroactively find other Bible verses that seemingly support their already existing position. I'll show you an example of it in a minute. First, let's take a look at their primary justification. It comes from Acts 15:28 and 29. It says, "The Holy Spirit and we ourselves have favored adding no further burden to you, except these necessary things: to keep abstaining from things sacrificed to idols, from blood, from what is strangled, and from sexual immorality." I know some people who will be really disappointed to hear that strangling is in there with sexual immorality, but anyways, this verse is referencing the old law from Leviticus. animals. Let's take a look at what the Bible originally said about it so that we have some context for what they mean by abstain from blood. Leviticus 17:13-14 says, "Any Israelite or any foreigner residing among you who hunts any animal or bird that may be eaten must drain out the blood and cover it with earth, because the life of every creature is its blood. That is why I have said to the Israelites, you must not eat the blood of any creature, because the life of the creature is its blood. Anyone who eats it must be cut off." Now here's the issue I have with this verse. I accept that the Bible is telling people to not eat the blood of animals. I can even accept that it's maintaining that rule in the New Testament. So I'm not going to bother bringing up the fact that the Old Testament laws were fulfilled with Jesus and don't need to be followed anymore, like the shellfish or the pork rule, or not wearing cotton and linen blends. I'm fine with all that. My issue comes from two main things. First, this is specifically talking about eating meat that hasn't been properly bled. It has nothing to do with the modern medical practice of blood transfusions. The word used here is eat. I looked it up. The original word is pronounced achal, and it can have a few different meanings depending on the context. In the context of flesh, it means to be wasted or destroyed. In another context, it can mean to be devoured or consumed by fire. And in this context, it means to be eaten by men. It does not in any way even imply that you can't use it for any other purpose outside of eating. And Jehovah's Witnesses might actually have an argument if a blood transfusion had to be done by eating it. And if we use the blood of animals, because it's specifically talking about animal blood too. But that's not what it's saying. And if those arguments don't grab you, how about this one? God only ever demanded human sacrifice a total of like 2 or 3 times, if you count Jesus. And that was in very specific cases for very specific purposes. In the Bible, at least in the New Testament, God always valued human life over everything by dying to uphold this outrageous ban on blood transfusions, when the Bible was clearly talking about making sure you properly bleed an animal before eating it. You're essentially sacrificing yourself to God, or to the Watchtower Society. Can you ever remember a time in the Bible where God demanded a human sacrifice like that? I know they didn't have blood transfusions like that, but seriously, think about it. There's nothing comparable to it. This is man's law, not God's law. Specifically, the law of the governing body members. Now, as I said before, Jehovah's Witnesses have gone back and retroactively found supporting evidence for a completely unsupported claim they made about the blood transfusion stuff. In their Keep Yourself in God's Love book, page 75, paragraph 3, bottom of the page, it says, Jehovah first disclosed this intimate connection between life and blood, as well as their sanctity or sacredness, shortly after Cain murdered Abel. Listen, God said to Cain, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. That is a stretch. The only way this verse can be interpreted to be against blood transfusions is if they already established it. It doesn't work as supporting evidence. There are lots of examples of that kind of thing, but the bottom line is that the blood ban doesn't make any sense from a doctrinal perspective, and they're pretty much the only Christians who think it does. Okay, next question. Number 3. How do you justify sending a group of Jehovah's Witnesses around to hospitals, called the Hospital Liaison Committee, to make sure members don't take blood transfusions? How can you reconcile that with free will and free choice? I know the answer you're about to give, Jehovah's Witnesses. You want this group of people to go around communicating with doctors so everybody's on the same page. But what's so hard to communicate about, I don't want a blood transfusion? Why do I need a group of people all up in my medical business to say that to a doctor for me? The liaison committee isn't there for anything more than making sure Jehovah's Witnesses follow the rules, and making sure if they do break the rules, the elders are informed so they can be disfellowshipped and shunned by childhood friends and family. There's nothing free about this choice. You're putting pressure on people to make a medical decision they might not have made otherwise. It's wrong, and you must know that deep down. Next question. Number 4. What is your biblical justification for believing that demons can be attached to physical objects, like at yard sales? And in that same vein, why do you believe that magic is a real thing that can really affect the world, despite rigorous testing that comes to absolutely nothing? Now, let me just address this first part to start. What's the biblical justification for believing that demons can be attached to physical objects? Spoiler alert, there is none. Granted, there isn't official doctrine as far as I know, but it's a heavy part of the culture. Jehovah's Witnesses are always wary about buying things at yard sales because they worry that whatever they buy might have demons attached to it. Like if it was in a room with a Ouija board or something, or if the person has done exceptionally evil things, demons might be attached to the object. And when they bring it home, the demons will enter their house and cause problems in their lives. It's one of the most superstitious groups I've ever come across in my life. Seriously. I remember hearing a warning when I was younger about Stephen King and his books or movies. I wasn't supposed to read Stephen King books at all because supposedly supposedly, according to some Jehovah's Witnesses in my congregation, he said that when he sits down to write, he just opens his mind and lets the demons take over. If anybody can find a quote like that from Stephen King, then do me a solid and cite it in the comments, because I'm seriously wondering if that's a real thing, and what the context of it was, if it is a real thing. Anyways, my mom also told me that when The Exorcist came out in 1973, some Bethelites, or some people who live on the Jehovah's Witness cult compound, broke the rules to go out and see the movie together. And it let demons into Bethel, which led to some weird stuff coming out in the literature around that time. That explains why they made that massive false prediction in 1975, which led to them hemorrhaging members. The belief is based on absolutely nothing, and it can't be proven false. It's completely built on sand. Now, as far as the whole "why do you believe in magic" bit goes, let me tell you why Jehovah's Witnesses believe in magic. It's because of a verse in the Bible. There are a few that talk about it, but usually they tout this verse. It's Revelation 21:8. It says, "But as for the cowards and those without faith, and those who are disgusting in their faith, and murderers, and the sexually immoral, and those practicing spiritism, and idolaters, and all the liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur." This means the second death. That's from the New World Translation, Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, so I wouldn't trust the translation completely. Honestly, I don't trust any translation completely, but either way, it specifically lists people who practice spiritism. And for that reason, Jehovah's Witnesses specifically believe in magic. They think it's a real thing. In fact, I'll give you an example of it. When I was younger, my mom told me that my dad used to practice black magic. Having a young, impressionable mind, of course I believed it, and all that implied. So one day my dad told me about how he'd been practicing black magic, and that night he was asleep in his bedroom at the top of the stairs, and my mom was sitting at the bottom of the stairs on the couch reading a book. This is long before I was born. In fact, it was also before either of them were even Jehovah's Witness. Anyways, my dad told me he woke up to see a face laughing at him, just laughing, 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 and he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. Now, to adult me, who's experienced sleep paralysis, it's obvious what was going on. I dealt with sleep paralysis for years. I know exactly what happened and why it happened, and I also know how to pull myself out of it. But to my parents, who are both really superstitious and who were primed to believe in this stuff from the get-go, it seemed like demonic possession. So my dad goes on to tell me that he was paralyzed, couldn't move, and finally he managed to move his hand enough to knock his Zippo lighter off the table and down the stairs. Now remember, my mom was sitting at the bottom of the wooden stairs on the couch. She should have heard it, but amazingly she didn't hear anything. Finally, the demon freed my dad and he could stand up and move around again. That's the last time he practiced magic. And not long after that, they joined Jehovah's Witnesses. It sounds like a ridiculous story when you understand science, but to a person who doesn't know what's happening, who's been reading a book on witchcraft, and to somebody who wants to believe that magic is real, it feels like demons. Confirmation bias. Every Jehovah's Witness has heard a story like that in their lifetime, and it locks them deeper into their position every time they hear a new one. But then they have to go home and pray for protection from demons for just hearing the story. Anyways, the point here is that it's impossible to reproduce. People can talk about these experiences they've had, but no matter what I do, I can't reproduce it in an objective way. I'll pull out the old tarot cards and play a few hands. I'll even pray to Satan, whatever it takes. Bring on the witchcraft. I'm not saying I've done that stuff, because I haven't necessarily, but no matter what I do, I can't get Satan to appear to me. I can't get demons to appear in my house. I can't achieve an experience like that. And you know what that means? It means it's meaningless to science. It has no value. It's not reproducible, and it's unfalsifiable. It can't be proven wrong. And I can't perform the trick in front of a crowd, so it comes straight down to anecdotes. Until we have a reproducible event, until I can actually pray to Satan and have a real, tangible, reproducible result, I'm not buying it. And there's no reason anybody else should either. Okay, sorry about that. Kind of got off on a tangent. Tell me which one of these questions is the most damning for Jehovah's Witnesses in the comments. Or if you have another question that I missed in the video or in the last one, drop it in here so I can research it and maybe put it in the next video. I try to respond to all comments for at least the first 24 hours of the video's release, sometimes longer. So let me know if there's something I forgot. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you want to make sure I can continue to do what I do, then consider supporting me on Patreon. YouTube is up and down a lot, and it's really hard to rely on it for anything. So check me out on Patreon or on Teespring. I have a bunch of cool shirts and stickers and stuff on there too. Also check out my podcast where I talk about all kinds of stuff, from politics to news about religion to LGBT issues. All links are in the description as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.